I'm Kate Green.
And I'm John Green.
And welcome to this episode of Crash Course,
where we will be talking about the novel One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest by Ken Kesey.
If while reading this novel you're thinking that some parts just don't make sense, that's probably because the author Ken Kesey was on a load of psychiatric drugs while writing, such as LSD and cocaine. Kesey was born in Oregon in 1935, and then where he attended the University of Oregon, and then he went to Stanford. A poor graduate student, Kesey took part in a government experiment to test the effects of LSD, where he grew an addiction for,
he got
addicted. He got addicted to LSD. And then he took up a hobby of traveling around from public to private events with his group, the Merry Pranksters, where with or without consent, he drugged people just to see what would happen. This Kesey, what a guy.
His inspiration for Cuckoo's Nest is said to come from his job as a psychiatric ward night attendant in the Veterans Administration Hospital before all of his middle-aged shenanigans begun. Yeah, and in 1965, Kesey was caught with marijuana, so like most 30-year-olds in danger of being incarcerated, he fled to Mexico and faked his own suicide.
All for nothing when he returned to the U.S. and was imprisoned for 5 months. After his imprisonment, he went back to Oregon, where he died there in 2001. This Kesey, what a guy.
What a guy. Our story is set in the 1960s in a psychiatric ward run by Nurse Ratched, an unfeminine, doll-like dictator. Chief Bromden is our narrator, who is a Native American schizophrenic who pretends to be deaf and dumb to be unnoticed.
But despite his possible unreliability as a patient in the mental asylum, he's actually a great narrator because he's observant and gets to see the behind-the-scenes secrets of the hospital while pretending to sweep as his chore on the ward floor.
The inciting event is when Randall McMurphy checks into the asylum, interrupting the mundaneness of daily life.
While boisterous McMurphy begins to get familiar with the ward, he meets stuttering Billy Bibbit and Dale Harding, president of the Patients' Council.
McMurphy learns all about the differences between the acutes, the chronics, the vegetables, and the walkers.
The big nurse controls every detail of the patients' daily lives and hires black boys for cruelty and attendants to command to her every wish.
She encourages the patients to spy on each other for rewards so she can keep a closer eye on them.
Reminiscent of the Red Scare? Anybody? Red Scare? Anybody? McMurphy's conflict with Nurse Ratched becomes apparent in the first meeting of the Patients' Council. McMurphy comes back with retorts to each of Big Nurse's attempts to subdue him and embarrass him.
After the meeting, McMurphy tells the patients that the meeting was like a pecking party where a chicken pokes at another chicken's wound in order to kill him.
Seems like an appropriate analogy coming from a guy who faked a mental illness to leave a work farm.
Also an impulsive gambler, McMurphy bets the guys that he can use his quick wit to make Nurse Ratched lose her cool. On a somewhat related note, Chief commonly describes the asylum as having a fog that looms over all of them. And to make things even more exciting, Chief believes that Nurse Ratched is somehow in charge of this fog.
How can fog contribute to the overarching theme of societal imbalance? Well, hold on to your seats. The fog is an antidote to rebellion, and as long as it lingers, the patients hide in it, comfortable with living a life that has no questions.
It hinders them from asking questions and rebelling against their unfair treatment. That is, until McMurphy comes in and decides to defy every routine they've grown habituated to.
The Combine is a common phrase used by Chief to represent the inner workings of the hierarchy that is found within the asylum. While Chief's schizophrenic mind makes the Combine seem like literal machinery, we as readers know that it's actually a representation of society and how there's always an upper class in charge of dictating over the little guys.
The patients of the asylum are used to being dominated, and they become complacent to injustice until McMurphy comes along. See a pattern here?
Oh, I see a pattern here.
Oh, we do.
The men begin to rebel with McMurphy's empowerment, such as when they stare at a blank TV screen for hours to protest the strict watching schedule.
McMurphy is pulling the patients, including Bromden, out of the fog.
Many of the patients are in the hospital voluntarily, but they stay out of fear of society on the outside.
On the other hand, McMurphy is committed, so Nurse Ratched determines when he can leave.
When McMurphy finds this out, along with the fact that the big nurse can authorize shock therapy and lobotomies, McMurphy restrains his rebellion for a time.
However, once Nurse Ratched thinks she has control, McMurphy accidentally punches through her glass window, showing he hasn't lost all of his rebellious spirit.
McMurphy begins to organize events that inspire the men against conformity. For example, he organizes a fishing trip with prostitutes to lure the patients, of course. While on their controversial fishing trip, Chief tells us how, and I quote, McMurphy led the 12 of them toward the ocean. Matthew chapter 14, anyone?
Kesey's laying it all out right here. McMurphy is Jesus, and these 12 men are his disciples. Spoiler alert, in the end, McMurphy dies for these men, making him the martyr of our story.
Despite the successful fishing trip and raised spirits of the men, McMurphy is visibly exhausted.
Nurse Ratched tries to turn the men against McMurphy by instilling in them the idea that he has been conning them for their money.
She then orders that the men on the fishing trip be deep cleaned, which is a huge problem.
The black boys are abusive, George is a germaphobe, and when McMurphy stands up for him, Bromden joins him in a physical fight against the black boys, while they're naked. Explicit, I know. Bromden and McMurphy get sent up to Disturb because of this.
Bromden receives one shock treatment and recovers quickly. However, the nurse threatens to give McMurphy shock treatments until he admits he was wrong, which we know he will never do.
He willingly lays out on the cross-shaped table and asks if he will receive a crown of thorns. Hello, Jesus! And he receives one shock treatment after another without any recovery time, which is severely damaging to his brain.
Nurse brings McMurphy back, and on one night, the men organize a fantastic party with whores and vandalism.
Nice.
Fantastic.
And the men agree that they are truly men after this night of rebellion. However, Billy Bibbit blames the events on McMurphy in fear of his actions being told to his mom.
Because we all know, Big Nurse is quite the tattletale.
Quite the tattletale.
After Billy commits suicide, Nurse Ratchet accosts McMurphy and he erupts in outrage. After attacking Big Nurse, McMurphy receives a lobotomy, making him essentially brain dead. Jesus is sacrificed for the betterment of others? I think yes.
The men check themselves out of the asylum, but Bromden stays. He suffocates McMurphy with a pillow because he knows McMurphy would never want to live like that, essentially brain dead with no power of his own.
That's the story.
Now click below to learn more.